Hi there, Paul Frampus, the Director of WISER, and just wanted to talk to you a few minutes about getting the debriefing conversation started. As you know, we train people in debriefing from all over the world. And one of the things that we understand and we realize based on observation of novice debriefers as well as some experienced debriefers alike, there can be some hesitancy or some difficulty in initiating the debriefing conversation. We think that if you use a structured model of debriefing, such as our structured and supported debriefing model, otherwise known as the GAS model, this can help with some aspects of initiating the debriefing conversation. But I think that one of the things that is a tip that can be implemented is to forget about the learning objectives. Forget about what you're trying to accomplish at the beginning of the debriefing discussion. Just think about striking up a conversation with a colleague or a friend. Because once we can get the participants of simulation talking and reflecting on the simulation, which we think is a great starting place for any debriefing, then the conversation can naturally lend itself towards migrating towards the learning objectives and the exact debriefing points that want to be covered. One of the important first steps of any debriefing situation is to make sure that your participants are emotionally ready. As you know, simulation can invoke lots of different emotions. Sometimes humor, fun, sometimes anger, sometimes sadness. And we want to make sure that we have looked after our participants' emotional needs insofar as a surveillance or screening. We want to make sure our participants ready to engage in this conversation to further their learning. One of the ways that we can do that is just to simply ask some questions. Start off the debriefing with asking some simple questions or acknowledging their feelings. If they appear to be stressed, if they appear to be tense or angry, just simply saying, wow, that appeared stressful. Or it looks like you guys are pretty stressed. You can say things like that, and you can say that you seem stressed, and that's your observation. And that doesn't mean that they did something right, wrong, or otherwise. We can help to calibrate or decrease or take some tension out of the air with that simple statement of, wow, that looks stressful. Other ways to think about starting the debriefing conversation, I mentioned earlier, forget about the learning objectives. Don't focus on diving in and immediately talking about the grit of the scenario. Maybe just starting the conversation with pointing to a participant or looking at the group of participants and say, who can give me a rundown of what they just experienced or what you just experienced in this scenario? And the nice thing is, you can either assign somebody, you can do it with visual eye contact, you can do it with a gesture to call on somebody to start that. But once they start their recollection of the scenario, that begins a conversation flow. And it's a safe zone, if you will, insofar as all you're asking them for is what they remember. So we're not asking for something right, we're not asking for something wrong, we're not putting them in a challenging spot to have to answer a question or knowledge base. We're just saying simply, tell me what you just experienced. The nice thing about starting the debriefing like that is it's generally comfortable for the participants. It's generally comfortable for the faculty member or the person conducting the debriefing. The other thing is it immediately starts a self-reflective process. Because if the person is recounting what they just experienced or giving you a summary of what they experienced in this scenario, they're thinking about it. They're in their own mind playing a movie and thinking about what happened. The great thing is, let's say your scenario had 5 or 6 participants in it. As the one person speaks their mind and talks about the recollection, what does that do? The other participants that experienced that same scenario, they're starting to think about it too. And they're trying to reconcile their thoughts of what happened in that scenario with what the person is saying. So we are getting self-reflection cranked up across the spectrum of all the learners. And then after the first person says the first few sentences, divert the conversation to somebody else and say, do you have anything else to add? And then you get on the pathway of confirming the emotional readiness or the readiness of the learners to engage in this conversation. You're also starting to tally up in your mind by listening to the words, watching the verbal, the nonverbal cues. How do they think they did? And we think this is an important sort of part of the first phase of debriefing. We call it the G phase in the GAS model, the gather phase. We're gathering information on emotional readiness. We're gathering information on how do the participants perceive that they did in this performance. And then as we have this conversation, which is usually stimulated through questions by the debriefer, it becomes a lot more of a natural feeling to start migrating in to the nitty-gritty aspects of the scenario that you want to cover in detail that are, or should be, driven by the learning objectives of the scenario. So that's just a few minutes, just a couple thoughts on how to get the debriefing conversation started. I hope you find this helpful. Look forward to seeing you next time. Happy simulating.